Welcome to the Marketing on Purpose podcast. I'm your host, Michael Fennick, partner at RDB. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Will Scott, owner of Steelpoint Marketing, an agency specializing in B2B clients, helping them to achieve their growth goals by offering both strategic marketing and tactical implementation services. We're also joined by RDB founder Mario Alonso Debu and international marketing executive Karen O'Brien. In today's episode, we discuss the differences between B2B and B2C marketing, how Will generates leads for Steelpoint, the importance of being data-driven and defining your target. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider leaving us a rating and a review. And now, the podcast. Will, what have you been up to? What's on your plate now? And maybe tell us what you do.
Independent marketing consultant, or sometimes I call myself a fractional CMO. And I typically work with B2B organizations and help them either improve or run their marketing organizations for them so that they can achieve their outcomes of generating new marketing qualified leads or creating industry awareness or whatever that might be. So in my career, I've done just about every job you could imagine in a marketing department, from cutting email copy to running webinars, what have you. So I've done most of the jobs out there. And so as a result, I pretty much know what it takes to get things done in a B2B marketing organization.
Very cool. And we did some work together at Western Union. You basically helped us restructure into a social/comms organization globally. So maybe, 10 seconds on that, because you did some fantastic work for us.
It is, and I really appreciate that. What I found, Michael, in my shorter term engagements, which are not necessarily fractional CMO, is the answers are already there within the organization. The answers are already in the heads of the people that you're talking with. They're brilliant, they're smart, they're experienced. All I do is provide almost like a therapy type service of extracting those thoughts from their head and crystallizing and codifying it into something that's fathomable by other people in the organization. And frankly, that's all I did.
And that's a perfect way of putting it, because we were many agencies, dozens of people that were running 1,000 miles an hour, and you help us kind of crystallize that. You brought us around the table and whiteboarded for, I think, 3 or 4 days in Miami, just what it is that you saw from an outsider, and then also as a professional, to say, okay, here's kind of where you are, guys. And it was very enlightening. So it was awesome work.
I try and use an engineering sort of approach of that. As an engineer by training and education, I have to deconstruct things so that I understand them, and you have to decompose them to their atomic elements. And usually when I can understand them, because I'm not a very smart person, it means anyone can understand them. So I interrogate people. I say, what does it mean when you say this word or when you say that? Let me crystallize that and codify that in simple big pictures. And then if I can understand it, and hopefully everyone can understand it, then we can look for opportunities to tune.
Yeah, and I think the benefit for the client, being a client, is that you help us realize those things, right? So not only do you digest it and design it, but for me, the many hours that I spent with you, it's like, oh yeah, okay, when I'm saying this now, I'm thinking through what it is that I'm doing as I'm running 100 miles an hour. So I think it's helpful not only to get your output, but for the person on the other side to think through, those questions and answers. Cool. So what are you up to now, Will?
So now I've got 2 fractional CMO engagements on. I actually recently got an engagement where I'm call it a teaching assistant, or it's called a program leader at Kellogg School of Management. So I'm working on an online course there called Product Strategy, and I engage with students on discussion boards. I grade assignments and things like that. I'm enjoying interacting and engaging with the students and listening to their questions. I had a great one today. In fact, just before this meeting started, someone said, what's the difference between a product manager and a product owner? And I said, I remember I had that exact same question, and it took me a while to figure that out. So sharing my expertise and my experience with these students is great fun.
You touched on a question. So everyone is virtual. Has that changed your line of work and your consulting? Because I know you do business overseas. You're based in Austin, Texas. Have things changed, or are they relatively the same for you? And how has, distance business change things for you?
I think largely the same for me. Most of my business is done virtually, but what I miss is, and what I always try and do, and we spend some time together in Denver and Miami and things like that, is I love to spend at least some time face to face over a beer with the people I'm working with, because you can't sadly replicate that in a virtual way. To talk about and news about family and life and things like that just provides a connection where you just work better with people. And sadly, I don't do that right now. But aside from that, it's business as usual for me.
Yeah, and we have some stories to ruminate about in the Miami airport.
Yes.
Yeah, that was.
We won't go there. No evidence.
And I fondly remember the horrific snowstorm in Denver that we didn't believe was going to be big. And then we walked back, Mary and myself and you, through a white wall of snow.
I do have video of that, Will.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask you a question in terms of how did you know, B2B is kind of like the stepchild, right, in marketing. So why B2B, and how did you end up in B2B, and what's the first reaction people have when you say B2B marketing?
I think they take it that it's not sexy, it's not attractive, it's not using cool, slick, 20-second TikTok videos on Facebook. It's the old sort of curmudgeon of marketing. But it's not by any means easy to do. If you think about it in a B2C context, you're trying to convince one person you're trying to provide an emotional reaction to one person so they take action on that. In a B2B marketing and sale motion, you've got many people you have to think about. You have to think about the influencers, you have to think about the detractors, you have to think about the decision makers. So it's a very complex, sophisticated sell that can span many, many months. But the payoff at the end is several $100,000 of software purchase, or what have you. So it's not as instantaneously gratifying as perhaps B2C. As context, I actually just finished a fractional CMO for of all things, a geopolitical publication company here in Austin. And it's B2C. And what I loved about it is, and I just thought of you guys all the time, is you can launch a campaign and know within 48 hours whether or not that's working. And that's great. That adrenaline rush, it's almost like a drug addiction. Like, I love this. Now I can see with a B2B campaign, I might be slogging it for 2 months before I know whether it's going to work. So it's a slightly different pace of living. And it was great insight for me to do that. But although it was tempting, I think, I've honed my craft in B2B, and I think that's where I'm going to stay. I'm not sure a good marketeer can paint themselves both B2B and B2C. I think there's quite a fork in those two roads. Unless it's a very, very small scale transactional B2B offering, then I could imagine that. But big, hefty software sales or equipment sales, it's not something that gets decided in 48 hours.
So you don't believe in that saying of like, in the end, you market to people, and if it's B2B or B2C, it doesn't make a difference. You say the process of building up a lead is so different when you look at B2B than fast consumer goods, for example.
I'm not sure I'd go that far. I'd say ultimately every sale is a result of an emotional reaction. This is going to get me a bonus. This is going to help my job go better. I'm going to look like a hero in front of my boss. So don't get me wrong, that's going to happen. But the difference is it's not just one person I'm trying to convince. There's many players in there that have their own emotional needs. A common one is, well, hang on, Will's coming in, he's marketing this stuff, and that sounds awfully like what I do every day on spreadsheets. So let me find all the reasons why whatever it is he's marketing is not going to work, because I'm actually quite threatened by it. So you have to think about multiple different constituents as opposed to I'm trying to convince Mario to wire some money or buy some sneakers. Or buy a beer. Yeah.
So it's more complex. So you're saying that B2C is easier?
I would never say that. I really wouldn't. No, I mean, what really impressed when I went with you guys back in Western Union is you spend a lot more time thinking about the psyche of the individual, like their individual motivations. In a B2B marketing and sales motion, you actually think of it slightly differently. But interestingly, and I've thought about this a while, I blog about it at one point in my life. Just like we characterize an individual's personality, we say this is the kind of person that they are. I actually think you can characterize a company's personality. I think Google looks very different personality-wise to Procter & Gamble. So I think you can think of organizations almost like, Google wants to use the latest cool stuff, and let's talk about how innovative and snappy and all that sort of stuff we are. Procter & Gamble, maybe a little bit more of a laggard. They want stability. They want assuredness. So I think there are lessons to be learned from B2C in the B2B world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So you basically say a company is a virtual representation or artificial representation of a person, depending on their values and their purpose and their culture. You could actually profile them into different personas and say, there's the Google-like, there's the Procter & Gamble-like. Yeah, that's a cool point.
Precisely, yeah.
How would you go about that though? Because, and we do that a lot in terms of rebranding and mission statements and, purpose statements and culture. And then we put our beautiful values on the wall. And then, especially in times like these, those don't mean much. So when you look at a company and you profile it, do you start with leadership? Like, do you look at the CEO and then compare how he acts compared to his values, and then that helps you get an idea of the company? Or how do you approach?
I think you can look at a company. I think you can look at people like, financial services or healthcare, and you can look at their risk aversion, because if they do things wrong, bad things happen, right? And you can sort of craft your marketing messages to respond to that. Whereas a different company, a smaller company, a faster moving company, maybe it's not about risk aversion for them, it's about competitive advantage. So right. I think there are ways, but I don't want to suggest in any way it's algorithmic. I think this is quite, complex sort of decompositions. But then when you double click down, you say, listen, I got to think about the chief information security officer. I have to think about the chief information officer. I have to think about all those individuals will have different priorities. And so you've got to craft your messages differently to those people as you sort of launch this multi-pronged campaign to try and get the lead, get the MQL, and that's what I'm in the business of. I'm in the business of I generate the leads, they go to sales. I actually I use it's a little bit of a, I wouldn't say it's a miserable analogy, but I liken myself to the Navy, right? And the Navy's storming the beach. Here's my job: I need to land the soldiers on the beach. Before they land on the beach, I need to fire my guns to make sure it's all softened up for them so it's ready for them to land. And once they're on the beach, I need to make sure they got the right weaponry to take that beach, right? But that's their business. They're the ones taking the beach. I've got to prep it. I've got to supply them. I've got to get them there safely. And so in that respect, my job is to deliver the MQL. After that, sales, you go do what you do, right? I'll give you all the slide decks and all the videos you want, but you're the experts of that. I'm the Navy. I'm not the Marines.
Can you define what MQLs are?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So there's a company several years ago called Serious Decisions, which I think was bought by, Gartner. I'm not sure. And they created something called the demand waterfall. And so basically it provided a common taxonomy for B2B marketing and sales organizations to think about leads. So I have my prospect, and then I have my marketing qualified prospect, and then I have my sales accepted prospect, and then I have my sales qualified lead. So there's a whole taxonomy, which is a common technology when we talk about MQLs. That's a marketing qualified lead. And typically what that means is, Michael or Mario or whatever, you've interacted with me, you've downloaded some papers, you've attended some webinars, I'm going to attribute you with points, and then at that point, I'm going to MQL you. Some marketing organizations actually have the inside sales function reporting to them, where they say, not only am I just going to qualify you, someone's going to have called you and verified typically the model he uses. I want 2 out of 4 of BANT. Now, BANT means Michael has budget, authority, need, and timeline. I'm going to do a quick 10-minute call to get 2 out of those 4s. Yeah, Michael's got juice. He really needs this, or he's got authority, whatever that might be. At that point, I'm going to say, let me slate you for a discovery call with the enterprise sales exec, right? At that point, the SEs, the sales engineers, and the execs get on. So that's what's called an MQL, and that's our primary currency of thinking about our successes, MQL volume. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what you just described, Will, is thinking through all of those strategies at a high level and the tactics for everyone to get there. And I think that's where the value that I saw in our work is understanding everybody's job, even to a degree that they don't even understand their job, and then putting all those pieces together and building a strategy and delivering that, that Navy plan that you talked about, I think is brilliant. So,
yeah. And oftentimes companies use this kind of throwaway phrase, it's everyone's job. And I sort of push back. No, it's not. Yes, it's everyone's job to make sure the company's successful. But within that, we have clear, bright lines, demarcation.
Right.
This is where we draw the line. It can't be everyone's job to issue the invoice at the end of the transaction. It's not. It's the finance department's job. It's not my job. That sounds awfully horrible to say. Yeah, it sounds quite sort of negative to say like that, but that's how I find it.
No, but I think this is, I mean, we saw it with our organization as well, right? If there are no clear rules, you can define the rules and then break them from time to time. But if there are no rules, like everybody's lost, and they're more miserable than if there are none, right? So yeah, I totally get that. And I also love how you really do like a British Dunkirk analogy to explain B2B marketing. I think that's great. It's very, very British of you.
With B2B marketing, you think that storytelling is still important?
The model I like to use, particularly in the world of software, and that's really where I spend a lot of my time, is this DILO, or day in the life of a road. What I try to do is describe and resonate with you about what I think your day looks like. And then I try and highlight things you perhaps don't like about that day. And then I tell you about how you're not going to have to do those things you don't like in the new world when you buy whatever it is I happen to be selling. So understanding that story in the context of day in the life, I think does work. I don't know how, and again, I'm not a B2C guy, so you guys tell me, is that what you do? But I think about day in the life of, the user, the decision maker, the guy who's got to, defend his investment to his boss. I think about their day in the lives.
Yeah, they're different decision makers within a consumer journey, but yeah, I think it's very comparable.
What I find so much when I think about this is so often in marketing and sales, the verbs remain the same. It's only the nouns that change. We all have a buyer's journey we're going through, right? There's nuances within that. Once you double click, is it B2B? Is it B2C? Is it B2B at $500 a seat, or is it B2B at $500,000? Mm-hmm. But the verbs are always the same. I think at a meta level, we won't see any difference in the verbs of that buyer's journey.
Do you see, Will, we were focused on B2C with our work in Western Union. Talk about how data-driven B2B is versus B2C, or is it the same? Should it be the same?
I think it's getting there, but I looked at what you guys are doing in Western Union, and I looked at the stuff this B2C company is working with, way more sophisticated. The amount of intelligence that you can get on the B2C, the consumer, is incredible. Mm-hmm. Where they're visiting, what they're watching, what they're looking at, the lookalike audiences you can create. I mean, all that sort of stuff. We have some of it in B2B. I can see when you hit my site, I can see you downloaded a paper. I'm going to give you 50 points. If you get 150, I'm going to MQL you. But not nearly as much of the wealth of information that you on the B2C guys have. So it's a different level, although it's improving all the time.
Do you think organizations are using that data, though? The data they have today?
Not nearly to the extent it can. It's almost overwhelming, the amount of data. And it's not that I don't have data available to me. And oftentimes, because like, what should I do about this data? Should I pay attention to it? Should I not pay attention to it? So no, I think it's because they don't know what to make of it and what decisions to make as a result of looking at that data.
Using AI and compiling the data and then extracting any usable insights out of it is kind of where people are right now, right? They're trying to figure out of the realms of data that I have available to me, even if it's not everything I hope for, what can I do with it?
Yeah, what's the insight, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So on the B2C side, we have analytics, right? On the B2B side, do you have analysts like we had at Western Union that their sole job is to dig through data and deliver those insights? So is that same model work in B2B, or is that something that's needed?
I think big companies would, big sophisticated companies, I'm sure they've got a data marketing analytics side. I think in the smaller companies I work with, you just make the best you can. Like, okay, the SEO stuff is interesting, website's interesting. I'm not sure what to make of that. Our metrics are a lot more blunt and crude, mainly because, I close the transaction. I got a sales team, and if I start sending rubbish over to the sales team, they'll go nuts with me, right? So I have to have these qualified MQLs that go across that require, a little bit more nuance. So yeah, I'm sure big companies do have it. And I would love to have the big bucket of data you could just pour into the AI machine, and then the answer to life, death, universe comes out the bottom. But I'm not sure we're there yet, but I've been watching it with interest.
I never asked you this, but what is the range of companies you work with, right? Is it mostly SMBs or is it a great mix? Like what kind of soldier are you? Are you fighting like Navy SEALs or are you part of the massive army?
I still say, look, I'm Boba Fett. I'll go work for the Empire. I'll go work for Princess Leia. I really, it doesn't matter. I'm just exercising my craft. I would say the companies where I'm fractional CMO, they're sub 20 million, and that's right, because they don't need a full-time CMO, in my opinion. At some point, they will need a full-time CMO. They will come in for 3 months. Here's the deliverable we want at the end of it. So it can vary. Keep my eye out for cool new technologies, try and implement those and test those out. But again, Boba Fett, I don't care what side you're on. I'm
gun for hire.
I'm a gun for hire, yeah. And I'm not ashamed of that.
Yeah, no, you say it on your LinkedIn profile. It's the intersection of strategy and execution. So luckily, your mind strategically is brilliant and you've executed well.
You're very kind.
We were talking a lot about growth lately, right? Because with the crisis, of course, every business almost like a knee-jerk reaction was, okay, we still need to sell now, and we need to find income now, and we need to keep the cash flow alive. And you said you work with companies who are around 20 mil. Where I see the struggle is not even just with the smallest, but even like 1.5, 2 million, 3 million. What's your experience when it comes to growth with that kind of companies? How do you keep the balance between community building, relationship building, and selling? Because little companies have the patience to say, developing a qualified lead takes a year.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
That's an interesting question. And I think one of the biggest challenges I note with smaller companies is they don't have a discipline in saying what they do because they're not a critical mass. Basically, anything that's broadly within their wheelhouse, they want to say that they do. Mm-hmm. And so it's oftentimes an interesting conversation when I meet small companies. I mean, even pre-revenue companies. Who's your target market? The wrong answer is everyone. And what's your offering? The wrong answer is anything to do with AI or anything, but I understand they're at that point where they don't actually know what it is they do. So they kind of want to have this shotgun approach, which is fine, but that's very hard to accommodate and be all things to all people when it comes to marketing, as I'm sure you guys have experienced as well. And that's a real challenge, is to try and convince them you need to be focused. And sadly, that does mean you need to slide chips on the roulette table, right? You have to pick numbers here. You can't just throw your chips on the roulette table. That's not a betting strategy that's going to work. And a lot of my coaching is, what is it? Hey, if you need validation, let's go talk to some prospects. Let's go talk to some wins. Let's go talk to some losses. But that's a very difficult thing for people to do, is to have that discipline of, this is what I do.
How much do you think, Will, that is chalked up to understanding their purpose or understanding their brand and starting from there versus being greedy and wanting to run a business for money and not for a reason?
I think certainly the younger companies I've met, there's always a great passion in the founders. They're doing something they really enjoy. There's some who are just doing it for money, but generally they're in that because they really enjoy what they're doing and they're very, very smart at what they do. But they get to a point where they start having employees, they start having bills, they start having legal departments, and then all of a sudden it's, I got to get revenue at any cost. Like, I've got to feed this beast. And it's in that moment, it's in that pivot that you think, hang on a minute, we might be losing focus here. And therein lies danger, I think.
What do you consult your clients then? Like, but these are the conversations you have over a beer that you mentioned, right? Which is now missing because that's hard to communicate in a workshop, in a group. It's something that you need to sit down with the CEO or with the marketing lead and discuss, say, look, maybe our sales target are not the most healthy thing to do now. Maybe we need to focus on something else, or we need to readjust the KPIs. Yeah, makes sense.
So that's a good question. When I structure my relationships, I try and do this. Whoever my champion is, whoever's brought me on board to that, I have a sort of different conversation with them than I do with the people I'm working with. And that conversation goes the lines of, listen, I'm a piece on your chessboard now, right? You need to think of me as a piece of the chessboard. If you need me to move in a certain way, I can. But we also need to have the relationship where I can be candid and honest with you without fear of upsetting you. And one of the things that helps have that conversation is, I want to be clear, I got no dog in this hunt. I'm not angling for a job here. I don't want a job. Like, I'm here to give you the best advice I possibly can. And if I think you're not making good mistakes, let's talk that through. And again, that sadly, that is the conversation over a glass of wine or a pint.
Yeah.
And that's difficult to get that rapport. Most of my business is referral, so I'm coming with someone's stamp of approval, which helps me a lot in building rapport and credibility and pedigree with a net new engagement.
Yeah, I remember that, and we were. I'm really grateful that you did that brilliant survey where you actually looked at marketing agencies and how they attract business, and you shared that with me. It feels like 2 years ago, and you said 9 out of 10 leads are still coming out of relationships. Right?
Always.
And would you say that's specifically just for that branch or industry, or because it's service, or would you say that's a good golden rule to live by in general?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about that. I think that my choice to buy Cisco equipment over whatever other network provider equipment is not based on my relationship with the sales guy. It's probably based on my relationship with the technology. But in a business like you're in, in an agency business, it's all about relationships. It's all about how good is my rapport with that person. How can we communicate almost on a binary level where we don't have to, we can just talk frankly and honestly. So I don't think there's a generic answer for that. What I find in my business, it's all about me and my personality and my ability to get on. Cisco is a different thing. It's price and features and functions and speeds and feeds.
We talk about B2B marketing and channels. I used to work with Cisco way back in the day when they set up the blog and the online newsroom. And it's really matured a lot since then. And use of social media with B2B companies, I think, has really matured. Where do you see opportunities with social and B2B?
That's a good question. I think, I think of social in B2B context, not as a lead gen thing, it's an awareness thing. So I think in social media, you want to be demonstrating your credibility in whatever space. So I've got a client right now that's in the area of mobile security, and we're monitoring every day the latest breaches on an Apple phone or Android, what have you. We're sending that out and we're making commentary about it. So it's about creating credibility. And ultimately that will flow through to hopefully lead conversion. But yeah, I think for me, when I think about social in the B2B context, it's about awareness and getting the message out there. But again, my companies, small companies, we do, I would say the bare minimum, but I'm sure Cisco's got an entire crew of people costing, I don't know how much, purely thinking about social. And, it's kind of the domain of really big companies.
What about LinkedIn? Do you think that's a place where you can establish relationships or put out thought leadership?
I think you certainly could do thought leadership. LinkedIn's a great platform, actually, and they continue to innovate. When it comes to business, it's great for awareness, getting those followers, tweeting the articles, what have you, but it's also great for hardcore lead gen as well. I'm running multiple campaigns right now for my clients where I'm inviting people to virtual conference. I'm doing, ad roll stuff where I'm advertising, a paper to download or something like that. So LinkedIn is a great multi-purpose platform, and it is the platform for business. Look, someday in the future, my small clients, we do the bare minimum on Facebook, but as a lead gen mechanism, Facebook's not going to do it for me right now. I'd spend my money on LinkedIn before I spend my money on other things. And they're continuing to innovate with their tools, I have to say.
Do you think video is still strong for B2B?
I do. And I don't know whether it's you B2C guys who've conditioned the whole world to be attention deficit, but no one's sitting through my 20-minute videos anymore. And that's down to you guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
here we are doing a podcast, right?
Here we are doing a podcast.
Audio, yeah.
Is live important as it is in B2C, in B2B?
Not for me, not with my clients, but I do need the 90-second soundbite subtitled. Let me just put enough words in there to tease you into click and watching it. So that too long didn't read is pervasive all over the place. You need to get it in 3 bullet points, not in 6 paragraphs. Right now, I'm organizing a virtual conference right now. We're not doing hour slots, we're doing 20-minute slots, TED-like slots, right? That's the best I can do because it's quite complex subject matter, but the shorter the better. And then how I can repurpose that. You know, I was telling Mario the other day that I'm running a podcast as well. Podcasts are great because I do the podcast. I can lift out little audio snippets from those podcasts. I can lift out little soundbite subtitles of the podcast. I can have a copywriter write that podcast as a ghostwritten blog, which I go back to the guys and say, look, you're right, publish it under the byline. Like, podcasts are awesome because you can squeeze so much content out of those in different lengths and different formats. And it's all, you know, I'll say for free. It's the one chunk of the podcast, and then you can repurpose it in all different times.
What do you think B2B needs more of right now?
Wow, it's a difficult. I don't know. I think there's lessons to be learned from the B2C side. I think there's tools and techniques and approaches that you guys are using that we need to be paying attention. Like, how do you get that better analytics? But what I will say, I think both sides of that equation have realized is much deeper into the customer buying journey before they ever pick up the phone. Right. They want all that information available. They want all the specs. They want the videos. They want everything before I even come close to wanting to speak to a sales guy. I'm way down the customer journey. Whereas, you know, I think 20 years ago, you know, pretty much after please have someone call me, they were straight into that. So, you know, I think that's something that we both have to recognize is customers' desire to be served with the information they want in the format that they want, with the right length and duration that they want, is not just a B2C thing, it's a B2B thing as well.
And I always feel that B2B is like, if you look even at your B2C campaign and you set it up as if you would do a B2B campaign, right? You're always in a better place because it's so funnel driven. You need to think about so much more than just putting out, here's the sneaker, right? Okay, so here's the sneaker. Here's the rationale on why that sneaker is better than all the other sneakers. Then you need to create that experience in the shop. And then that's where it starts. You need to think about, okay, customer service, follow-up, retention, client satisfaction. And I feel like in the B2C sector, it's all about here's the shoe, right? And all the other rest.
Yeah, let me ask this question, Will. So is the audience, is B2B audience salespeople, or are they just used to being sold by salespeople versus on the B2C side where it is more top of funnel, where it is more looking at those personalities, those trigger points, those pain points, those emotional connections. So how do you weigh those two things?
You know, I think about we both have funnels, and that's great. But I think when I look at a B2B funnel, right, and I'm an engineer by training, so I think about, you know, the hydraulics of the funnel. That's what I think about, the hydraulics. Like, what is the entire length of the funnel? What are the phases in the funnel? What are the choke points in the funnel? What are the leaks in the funnel? So what I'm asking is, how long does it take someone to move from they downloaded a white paper to closing a deal? And where do they get stuck? And maybe they always get stuck when it comes to standing up the proof of concept, or maybe they always get stuck when it comes to negotiating the contract. Who knows, right? But when you look at this funnel, I'm looking for what's the duration of each phase, what are the choke points, and where does stuff leak out?
So you look at it as an engineer, right?
I do. Yeah, and then I say, what can I do to lubricate that funnel? I mean, ultimately, we don't want a funnel. We want a pipe. We want everything that goes in the top to come out the bottom. And we want that pipe to be 1 day long, right? That's what we want. But the truth is, it's a 6-month funnel, and it starts off at 10x and ends up in 1x. And we've got to say, how do we change the shape of that funnel to make it as efficient as we can? And recognizing that we'll never get to 1 day, not with a $500,000 software sale. It will never be a 1 day. 100% in, 100% out. I might seem a little bit nerdy to think of it like that, but I'm an engineer. I make no excuses. That's how
no. I mean, that's a great comparison. So, I mean, from the B2B to B2C, is it the audience that you're dealing with, or is it the fact that when you're marketing?
No, honestly, Michael, I think that's what's lacking in the B2C space.
Yeah.
Right? So when we work on B2B, I can ask my client, what's your profit margin? How much can a lead cost? Mm-hmm. If I ask that on the B2C side, like I work with some of the biggest coffee companies in Austria, right? They've been around for 120 years. I ask them, what's your margin on that individualized coffee? And they say, I don't know. And then I say, okay, how much can I spend? When does this turn profitable? So how much can I spend in marketing to get there? and they say, I don't know, right? That would rarely happen on the B2B side, because I think that engineering approach is the foundation that often is so necessary for us in B2C to actually be successful, right? Because if we don't know how much we can spend, no matter if it's B2C or B2B, on a lead, how should we come up with a proper strategy, right? If we don't have the KPIs of conversion rate and all those things, it's really hard to engineer a proper pipeline or a proper funnel.
So there needs to be parity at some point, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, and we get all, I mean, my clients, we get all that out of Salesforce, right? Let me look at the pipe, let me look at the durations, let me look at the stalled leads, let me look at the conversion rates, let me look at where people are dropping out. You know, so for example, you might find deep into the sales cycle that, you know, the chief information security officer pops ahead and you don't have sufficient collateral describing the security technologies you have deployed around your SaaS offering. That's a problem we can solve. Yeah. And by the way, when we get really muscle tone about that, the sales guys will know, listen, champion, I know we're going to come across your chief information security officer in about 2 months from now. My experience is we need to head him off at the pass. So here's a white paper, here's a video, here's a whatever. Can you just bring that to him so that 2 months from now we're not visiting this choke point? So that will be an example of how we try and, you know, patch and lubricate the funnel. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And how individual is that? And so even for a company like 20 mil, right? So is that still manual research where you're like, okay, so we got this big lead. There's, I don't know, Cisco, you know, we will run across this, the CIO in 2 months. So you do the research manually, you vet them, and then you think about what's best to serve to him? Or?
Yeah, I think at a meta level, I mean, we can broadly talk SaaS, for example, a SaaS solution. You're going to have security questions for sure. That's going to happen. It doesn't matter what it is. And the more sensitive the data you're containing within there, maybe you're containing HIPAA information or PII, the more rigorous that investigation is going to be.
I see.
So you can sort of know at a meta level, if I'm selling SaaS, someone's going to ask me somewhere about security. I know that's going to happen. And of course, they're going to ask about minimum purchases. They're going to ask about how they scale. So you can anticipate a number of questions. You'll certainly find nuances depending on whatever it is. But things like, how do I train? How do I secure? How do I onboard? That's all we're going to have those questions regardless of what it is the software happens to particularly do.
Jumping all over the place here, but can you speak a little bit about B2B and influencer marketing? Is that prevalent? Is it used? Is it more in the thought leadership space?
Yes, but my influence is not, and I'm not going to be pejorative, my influence is not, I didn't even know the guys, Kim Kardashian, whatever the influences are on the beta side. No, my influences largely are people like Gartner and Forrester and the analysts, right? So you have to have a whole analyst relationships function. You know, Gartner pushes out the MQ. I've done more MQ, the listeners, that's called the Magic Quadrant. That's where Gartner assesses vendors and places them in a quadrant. And if you're top right in the leaders quadrant, you need to be top right. Yep. And regardless of whatever your opinion is about how that MQ is formulated, you need to be top right, because the top three, when the RFP goes out for a net new solution for, let's say, I don't know, accounts receivable, the top three are getting circled and the RFP is going to them. So there's my influencer. And I got to spend a lot of time with those guys, making sure they're educating what I do. I've got to drop a lot of money.
On the client side, that's actually the first thing that we look at. And then there's an entire process of vetting, of talking to peers, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's extremely important in terms of, you know, marketing a business solution to, you know, a large brand or organization.
But unlike the influencer, I can't just write a check and say, promote me on your Instagram feed. Yeah. That ain't happening with Gartner. Right. It's a lot of legwork.
You could argue that shouldn't happen on the B2C side either.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
There should be an established relationship there and a love for the brand.
I think it's really interesting to see how we have the parallel. I feel like the crisis and the whole work where we need to support SMBs moved us closer to the foundations of what B2B marketing is about, right? So now we talk to the clients and say, like, there's no way you can spend $500K the next 3 months and just expect any sale, right? Because people will sit on their wallet. They will be even more cautious. So again, it's about the fundamentals, right? It's about building those relationships, finding the barriers, finding the motivators, work them through the funnel, make them say, look, if you spend $500K on Facebook and your mobile website is 3 out of 100 on Google speed test, maybe don't spend those 500, because then you have a bounce rate of like 3 seconds, right? So
yeah.
The positive thing about this is I think it gets people back to the fundamentals. And if, as I said, if that gets us to think more like B2B marketers, I think that's a good thing, right?
I think so. But I mean, like we said earlier on, B2C marketing is like B2B marketing, but on speed. You can understand the efficacy of a campaign within 72 hours. You can know whether it's working or not. You can do really rapid A/B tests and fine tune it really, really quickly. But also the speed at which consumers stop buying might be 24 hours as well. I mean, right. that you're just moving at that frenetic, fast pace. B2B, we have the same behavior. It just takes a lot longer. I think a lot of companies will have got through Q2 and their bookings in Q2 because of momentum, sheer inertia. Sure. I think we're going to see a throttle back on Q3, right? But we're talking much, because the speed at which things move is a lot slower. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it is truly the nature of the beast. Is selling to a business is a big elephant you're having to manage, as opposed to the little buzzing fly, and you have to use different techniques whether you want to catch the elephant or catch the fly. That would be the analogy.
It's a beautiful quote. We have it. We have the snippet.
Elephant and the fly.
Elephant and the fly.
The elephant and the fly. Not saying one is more tasty than the other. Just need a big gun to shoot an elephant. It depends on how you cook it.
I think for a business, there's a lot more at stake in the decision that are B2B purchasing. Like not just the volume of spend, but also the switching pain, and the implications of if something works or doesn't work for them, what that does for their business.
Well, and the rigor of the people that are analyzing it. So an engineer versus a normal consumer or a brand marketer buying a product, I think are two different things. An engineer, to me, and I've worked with a lot of engineers, Will is the best of them. But I think they're critical in a different way. So I think that audience, takes a lot more time, takes a lot more thought. They're not going to be, purchasers that spend on the moment, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think Kara makes a great point there, and you use the word. I love that phrase, switching costs. The switching costs, the cost of error is much greater. I could argue me moving from a Ford to a Chevy. There ain't no switching costs there, right? I mean, that's a pretty easy thing. Me moving from a Google Home all over my house to Apple, that's a bigger switching cost, right? Because I got a kid I got to replace and all that stuff. Me extracting SAP ERP system and implementing Oracle, huge switching costs and many, many years of ramifications of making the wrong decision. I mean, we'll go back to the elephant and the fly. It's a big deal. And that's why they're cautious and they probe you on all manner of different ways, and proof of concepts and multi-month sales cycle and secondary proof of concepts and trial licenses. I mean, that's what makes me deal with the 6-month sales cycle as opposed to a 6-hour sales cycle.
So, Will, one of the I wouldn't say it was a tactic, because I thought it was very strategic, but one of the tools that you helped introduce to me was the CPAP model. And the CPAP model was essentially, actually, let me give it to you to tell us what it is, how it's beneficial as a tool.
The model is actually developed by a company called Mandel, and it's called SciPAV, and I learned it back in my Cisco days. And it's a really good way of crystallizing a situation and recommending a course of action. And it forces you to do it on one page. In fact, there was a time in Cisco where a VP wouldn't take a meeting of you unless you sent them this one-page PowerPoint beforehand. And it stands for this: the situation. You're just simply talking about the variables that have contributed to the situation, whatever that might be. You're not talking about problems at this point, just here's the situation. Then you talk about the complication, why this is not a pleasant situation to be in. The next one you talk about is the implication, which is basically saying, left unchecked, we think this will happen as a result of this. Then you make a position statement. We believe you should take the position on this particular problem. Then you make the action statement, which says, and if you do want to take the position, here's what we think you should do next. Mm-hmm. And then the final word is the benefit statement. And if you do it, this is what we predict the outcome will be. So situation, complication, implication, position, action, benefit. One slide, you're limited to 2 sentences at most. Anyone should be able to read it. And so it's kind of like, I was thinking about this the other day because I've got a part-time hobby of reading philosophy and things like this. You guys familiar with the haiku? You know what a haiku is?
Yep.
Okay, it's a Japanese art form for those people who don't know. And basically it's a poem that is written in a sentence that has 7 syllables, 5 syllables, and 7 syllables. And if I can be bothered, I can find one up. And so you've got to crystallize the essence of something in these 3 lines, 7, 5, 7. Doesn't matter about rhyming, just 7. So the more pure you can be, the more it resonates. And I realized as I was looking at something the other day, it forces you to really think about something. Here we go. We're pulling up a haiku. Let's find one here. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Refreshing and cool. Love is a sweet summer rain that washes the world. So that gets across the essence of whatever that person was having to think of. And I thought to myself, actually, the side pub's a bit like a haiku. It forces you to crystallize the essence of what it is you're trying to say in a pure and simple way. So there you go. SciPab is the haiku of business consulting.
SciPab?
SCIPIB.
After we met with Will, and we had a roundup after December, January, can't remember what year. I put everything into this model. No, I'm sorry. It was for community management.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, when we tried to.
I'm going to force Michael to do all his communications now through this model.
I would love that. Yeah.
No, I like freeform. Come on.
Here's a sentence.
What I love about it is it's multi-useful, right? You can use it for product positioning. The situation is I have an acre and a half of grass that I have my house on. The complication is that grass needs mowing, and I don't have the time to mow it. The implication is if I don't mow it, the homeowners association is going to come along and slap me with a big fine. The position is I need to find another way of getting this mowed.
I'll get some.
The benefit is I have grass that is mowed and I don't get big fines from the HOA. There you go. SciPab in real life, right?
Yeah. To wrap it up, Will, I think I would like to go back to the point that we made before we dove into this model about the implication of the switching cost, the security in B2B, the more rational decision making, the more stakeholders.
Yeah.
Is there any, and I remember this, one of the best ads that I got taught in advertising school was, how was it called? No CIO ever got fired for buying IBM, right? It's an ad from the 90s. I think it's one of the best taglines ever. And I think it's, one of the best B2B marketing campaigns in general. Do you feel there's still a way on how we can turn it around, right? Where it's sexy to buy IBM like Apple did instead of it's the rational, it's the secure way to do it. How do you build the brand? There's still where you say like, maybe there's a bit of a risk, but it's so cool. It's so hot. It's so sexy. I want to take it because I feel good about taking it.
Can IBM be sexy? I'm sure it can. But if you double click on that, it really depends on what it is you're selling. If you're selling to a healthcare company, a database system to store all the data that contains people's personal medical information, they ain't rolling the dice on a 1-year-old, Silicon Valley or, Austin tech startup. They're not. They're buying someone who's been around for a long time. But if you're trying to try some cool new stuff in the marketing organization to see, hey, listen, do I get legs on this if I start doing this with this cool marketing tool? You may take that risk. So it really depends on who you're selling to and their appetite for risk. That's sort of my position on it. And I'm sure IBM has stuff which is considered novel and innovative and has a level of risk.
They did it with Watson, right? They were one of the first who jumped on brilliantly, I think, on the AI bandwagon and turned almost B2B into a B2C tool.
Let me, I guess, end or get a piece from you, Will, about what you're doing. Maybe a little bit about Steelpoint Marketing.
It is, it's the vehicle I operate on, and I'm always interested in having interesting conversations. To be honest, at this point in my life now, it's not about the money like it is for many people. We're looking to get meaning and value out of what we do day to day. And so I'm always interested in having interesting conversations about interesting problems and see if I can either help solve that problem or direct people to people I know who might be able to solve that problem. That's where I get joy and pleasure these days, as I've got a bit of gray around my temples. Anyone who wants to visit me, it's steelpointmktg.com. It's not much on the website, just a contact form.
I wanted to ask you this, Will. You have do the right things and doing them right. Did you have that before Miami and you implemented that in our brains, or did that happen after Miami? Do you remember?
Oh, no, I think I got that from some Japanese manufacturing principle, right. Which is, strategy is doing the right things and execution is doing them right? So I try and help on both sides of that equation.
Just for your amusement, it took like 2 months within Western Union and still everybody said it wrong, right? In every sales pitch, like every time we presented that deck, it was like, doing the things right, to do things.
I'm going to create a meme.
That was hilarious.
Okay. All right, guys. It was wonderful chatting. Thank you so much, Will. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Mario. As I mentioned, it's like bringing friends around a virtual table. So looking forward to doing this again. Let us know what we can do for you. And vice versa. But this
all right, thanks. Thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate it. It's lovely.
Yeah,
you, Karen, lovely meeting you.
You too. Thanks.
And thanks for sharing all those insights, Will. Really, those pupils at Kellogg are fortunate.
Yep. Yeah, I got a few inbound questions. I have to answer them actually of my afternoon's work, so I'll work on that.
Right.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great day, guys.
Best to you and my family. Thank you so much today for listening to RDB's podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please consider leaving us a rating and a review. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Instagram at RDB.agency and on Twitter at RDB.agency. Thank you once again for listening. We'll see you next time.